Hello everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we'll be talking about elements of design. And before I begin with this new topic, in the last lecture, I'm just doing a small recap. In the last lecture, we talked about what is design, what is graphic design in totality. And in this lecture, we'll be talking about talking about the subject elements of design, and then we'll move on to the next, which is principles of design. So design, as everyone knows, is thinking made visual. Elements of design. Now let's understand what is the element in a design. In the previous lecture, if you remember, we've talked about, I've given you an example of an advertisement of a mobile phone brand, could be any brand. So the things that we discussed was that there was text, there was color, there was an image, and in totality the complete graphic was prepared keeping in mind what was the objective of the communication, what kind of a tone we have to keep, who's the target audience. Based on that, the whole design was prepared. So the text, color, the image, all of these comprises of the elements of design. I'll give you another and a very simple example. You guys are sitting in a classroom. How do we define that this particular setup is a classroom? Because the basic and the important elements that we find is teacher's table, your blackboard, duster, desks, projector. All of these are the elements that makes you look, that all of these elements and the way they are being placed are basically the elements of design, which gives you a whole picture that this is a classroom, because the elements that it has is classboard, the blackboard that you could find, teacher's table, teacher's chair, projector, desk. All of these comprises of the important elements to actually surface the fact that this is a classroom. So I hope with this example you are very clear what are the elements of a design. So the elements now we're going to talk about quite in detail. So let's head on. Okay, so here in the slide that you can see, we have point, line, shape, size, pattern, typography, texture, color, image. We'll be talking about all of these elements in detail. So let's begin with the first element, that is point. As you can see the definition, a point is the fundamental particle of graphic design. So you could see all of these, the images, that is point. That is the fundamental particle of graphic design. Okay. So there are two types of points out here that we're going to talk about. That is the real point and the virtual point. Okay, so real point are the point that you could see, and the virtual one that you cannot see. Okay, next we move on to is the line. So when we connect all those points, we find is the line. Definition of line that you can see on the screen is: a line is a form with width and length but no depth. Artists use lines to create edges, the outlines of objects. A line is created by the movement of the artist's pen. Line in is any mark connecting two points. There are few directions that are being mentioned here. See, as basis on the direction of the line, we have horizontal line. You could see the waves that we showcase. You could see the images that is there on the screen. The direction of a line can convey the mood. So horizontal lines conveys the calmer and a quieter mood. Moving on to the next direction, that is the vertical one. Vertical lines can imply power and strength. They can also suggest more of a potential for a movement. Can you see the pictures on the screen out there that showcase the vertical lines in the form of the direction that basically imply power and strength? Okay, then we're going to talk about diagonal lines. So up till now we've talked about point. Just a small recap for you. Point is real and virtual that we have talked about. Line, in case of line, we're talking about the directions of the line which conveys the mood. We've learned about horizontal, we've learned about vertical, and now we're going to talk about diagonal lines. Diagonal lines strongly suggest movement and give more of a feeling of vitality to a picture. They can also imply action, change, and dynamic energy. You can see the images on the screen, which clarifies the concept of a diagonal line. See, there are a few more examples out here. Then under the element line, we're going to talk about contour and gesture. Lines used to follow the edges of forms are called as contour drawings, and drawing which seem to depict more of a movement is basically the gesture. Let me just repeat this. When you are joining the edges of the lines are basically known as contour drawings, and when these kind of drawings depict more of movement and the actual art outline is called as the gesture. Then the next that we're going to talk about is line as value. Let me read this fact for you. Lines or cross hatching can also be used to create areas of gray inside a drawing. These areas of darker shading inside a figure called areas of value can give more of a three-dimensional feeling to an object. If you remember, you guys, whoever does sketching knows how to put a shade in a particular design or in a particular drawing so that you can have a 3D look out of it, and that kind of a look is basically known as line as value. See, there are a few more examples that you could see. Moving on to the next element, that is your shape. Anything that has width and height is a shape. A shape is an enclosed object. Shapes can be created by line or by color, and value changes which define their edges. Then under the shape, we're going to talk about volume and mass, because shape is considered to be 2D element while 3D elements have volume or mass. Just say for an example, you have sculptures which has volume and masses because they are more of a 3D kind of a thing. So if they are 3D, obviously they'll be having volume or mass, and if they're 2D elements, so they won't be having volume or mass. All right, moving on to the next is positive and the negative shape. In a picture, the shape that the artist has placed are considered to be positive, and the space around is known as the negative space. So the space that you're using to place your own picture or any particular kind of a design is called as a positive shape, and the shape around that positive shape becomes your negative space. All right, so we can see these examples of certain shapes that you could see on this slide. Have a look. We're going to talk about positive and negative shape with this diagram. I hope this clears out the thing. The images of fish that you can see around is the positive shape, and the places around the fish, that the black portion that you could see, is the negative space. Is it clear to everyone? All right, moving ahead. Next element that we're going to talk about is pattern. Okay, this is also very interesting. See, our tendency to make meaning in an meaning and order will find patterns in thing. For an example, you wear check kind of a checkered shirt, somebody wearing a checkered t-shirt, so that boxes that are being placed in an order is forming a pattern. See these examples of your pattern out here. The circles that you could see, they have been arranged in such an order that is forming a particular pattern. You could see, for example, in the web, you could see this fifth graphic or the fifth image on the screen out here, where in the form of a text also they are showcasing the pattern, as in what is the length of the sentence out there and how the description is being done. The amount of space which is being used is also a part of pattern. Next that we're going to talk about is texture. So there are two types of textures out here. One is your visual texture and one is your tactile texture. Before I explain what is a visual texture or what is a tactile texture, we'll first understand what exactly is a texture. So texture is the look or feel or the surface quality of an object. We experience texture, which we touch objects and feel their roughness, smoothness, or patterns. Visual texture creates an illusion of texture on a printed publication or a web page. See, Tactile, you know, the one that you can touch. From that character T, always remember tactile means touch. So touch, when you're able to touch a particular object, there you could feel the texture of it, whether it is smooth, whether it is rough. That exactly is your tactile texture. Next, they have explained is the visual texture that a designer create, or an illusion that a designer create to make that particular publication look beautiful. Okay, so let's understand all of that in detail. See, you could see certain visual textures and tactile textures out there. So up till now, we've talked about point, we've talked about line, we've talked about shape, we have talked about pattern, and we have talked about texture. All right. Moving on to the next element that you could see on your screen is space. Space is the distance or area between or around things. Space separates or unifies, highlights, and gives the eye a visual rest. See, see, if in a particular design we'll keep on putting all the elements and we just do not give any kind of a space, it will not be a visual treat to our eyes. Our eyes would, you know, it is difficult to read that particular graphic where we either have to, put our eyes closely under, which will ultimately lead to pain. So we don't have to do that. When we always have to make the graphic in such a way that it should be really calming, soothing to the eye of our target audience. So the way the elements are arranged, the spaces that are being given is very important, and the space is basically the breather space. And if it is not there, your design would look clumsy, your design would look crowded. For an example, in the class where you sit in, there's always a space, a particular amount of space between desk, a space between teacher's table and the desk. If I put all of these elements at just one place and do not give any kind of a space, the look of that particular room would not be that good, which you can see generally where there is a proper space between two desks, between two columns, and between teacher's table, between the class board and the teacher's table. So from there, you can understand the value of a space in a design, in the actual structure, as well as once you are designing anything. Now we're going to talk about size. Size is how large or small thing is. Size is very important in making a layout functional, attractive, and organized. It shows what is most important, attracts attention, and helps to fit the layout together. Like we talk about size, obviously we're going to talk about large or small. So if something that we want to emphasize on, we're going to make it large. If it's something we do not want to emphasize on, we want to make it small. See the kind of font size that we are using, the kind of picture we are using, basically where we want the eye of our audience to focus on. Depending on that, we're going to check the size of that particular object or that particular text. Can you see the examples on the screen? Great. Now we're going to talk about typography. This is very important, and there's a particular topic which is there in your syllabus over typography, one complete topic, because understanding of the font, what kind of a font to be used, what kind of a font size and font style to be used, it is very pertinent for a designer to understand the concept of typography. Okay, so typography can take you back to a different time where you'd set a mood. The old English kind of a font which are being used to communicate a particular message. They're like, a funky fonts used to, for a specifically for any party invite. But if it is a formal media invite, then there are formal fonts are used. So that kind of a type of concept of use of font style and size is very important for a designer to understand. See, these are certain example of various fonts which are being used. Say I gave you an example of a wanted person, the kind of font which is used in the third picture that you can easily see. Moving on. See another example. Carlsberg, Coca-Cola, Intel, Microsoft. Even in fact, you could see that there are many brands who are just writing their name as their logo. So the kind of font they'll be using, it has to be that people should identify with their brand. So now from here, you can understand the importance of the font or a typography out here. Look at Mercedes-Benz, the way the kind of font which is used. Canon, the way the font is being used, for Sony, for Microsoft, for MTV, kind of the way M is being used, where it is written music television, it makes it look more formal. So, and from here you will be able to make out the importance of typography in a design. Next, we're going to talk about color. Color in layouts can convey mood, create images, attract attention, and identify objects. When selecting colors for publication or a web page, think about what you want the color to do and what is appropriate for your purpose. Okay, for an example, very easy to understand this. If you have to convey something related to environment, you will obviously go with green. If you have to convey something related to royalty or something like that, you will be going up with purple. Something where you have to showcase the agony, some anger, you will be using red. So you have to understand what is the objective of the communication. Based on that, you will choose the appropriate color for its purpose. See, McDonald's, red and yellow, which is being used. Vodafone, red and white. Greenpeace, obviously if you're talking about green, we need to put that kind of a color. So up till now, we've talked about point, line, shape, texture. Then we talked about size, we talked about spaces, we have talked about pattern, we have talked about typography, and we have talked about color. So after understanding all of these elements, there is a small task for all of you, which is pick up any advertisement, any magazine, anything which you will find easily around you, which is a graphic. Now try and understand its element, the kind of font which is being used, the kind of color, and why is that being used, because that kind of an eye is very important for a designer to understand. Since you people are budding designer, so you need to analyze a lot of designs around you. So whenever you move around, go out, check why that kind of a font is being used, check why that kind of a color is being used, why that kind of a spacing and a sizing is being done in that particular in a graphic or things around you. All right, and in the next lecture we'll be talking about further elements, that is image and illustration. Thank you for now. You're requested to please revise what all we have discussed from the first lecture, which is design, graphic design, and the elements of design. Thank you for your patience.